Welcome to another Papers podcast, everybody. We're so glad that you chose today to spend some of your time listening to us. We're here to try to make sense of the medical education literature to help you make sense of your day. As per usual, we have the full cast of characters involved. First, there's my brother from another mother, Jason.
Hi, everybody.
And the other brother from yet another mother, John.
This family tree is really awkward. Good to hear from y'all.
And of course, you have my dear sister of love up north, Linda. How you doing, friend? You got a paper for us today?
I certainly do, and I hope you're happy with it. In fact, I hope you're all happy, and you get a lot of joy and pleasure out of this. I have entitled this podcast, Are You Happy Yet? What gives you joy and pleasure at work? And the article is called Sources of Joy in Medical Educators as Described by the PERMA Model. It's by Lagina et al. This year, 2024, in Teaching and Learning in Medicine. So let's start off with some dark things. We have burnout, mistreatment, bias, a poor learning environment, racism, depression, failure, mistakes. Are you depressed yet? Low self-esteem. And we've talked about all of these things on previous podcasts. So it's time for a bit of wellness. And this caught my eye, this paper, because it was the other side of the coin and because of a new model that I learned about. But we know that many wellness initiatives don't work. So let's look at what makes us happy. We know that clinician teachers or clinician educators actually have lower markers of burnout. For instance, they have an increased sense of personal and professional growth, an increased sense of reward, and greater empathy with students and colleagues. So let me ask you three, Jason, John, Lara, what gives you joy and pleasure at work?
That one's easy. I think about this from time to time as I'm talking and mentoring other people. I love being a doctor. I love being able to help somebody apply cool science, make a diagnosis, suture up a nice grisly wound. Like all those things give me satisfaction. And I love teaching learners as they discover new things. And honestly, I learn from the things they're talking about. So all three of those things bring me joy at work.
I got to echo a lot of what Jason said. I think it comes to the relationships. I chose a specialty because I had the opportunity to work within a team setting in a hospital. I would struggle to be in solo practice by myself. More and more, though, I am finding a little bit of joy at the end of a night shift. So we do casino nights where I walk out into, 5 a.m. and the city is quiet and, you've encountered some really hard things. And there's a juxtaposition of gratefulness for all the things that you can take for granted. And so I think in health care, we become a little blinded or numb to, how important the simple things in life are. And we've alluded to the idea that relationships, but just taking for granted your own health, taking for granted some of the privileges that we have. And, I see so much tragedy at work. At the end of that night shift, the juxtaposition of I should be grateful. I have a bit of joy that, there's a lot of privilege that I might have not appreciated if I didn't have that counterpoint.
So for me, I think actually I spent a little time looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Linda, because of this episode. And one of the things that I came to realize is that I think the hierarchy is busted, because I think in order to have joy, you do need to have your psychological needs met, and you need to feel secure and safe. I agree. That's a foundation. But then Maslow puts love and belonging, and then self-esteem, and then self-actualization. And the experiences I've had, say, in the past 5 years have shown me that nothing matters other than people. Another paper just doesn't matter. Another grant doesn't matter. But if you're struggling, I care. If the world's crumbling around you, then I will be there to stand beside you. And that's part of the reason I do this podcast. I do this podcast for you guys. The time I get to spend with you is I introduced you as family because I wanted to say that on this episode. You guys are my family. You're family far away. And so I'm glad that we have this episode to get together. But not that long ago, I was facing deportation, and not that long ago, I had a family member in health crisis, and you all stood right beside me and helped me solve problems and offered me ways out. And so as far as I'm concerned, Linda, joy is relationships and family, and at work, your work friends are the family you choose.
Wow,
I'm
thank
not
you
crying,
all.
you're crying.
And I think what I heard from all of you is that people, whether it be the people we treat, our patients, our colleagues, our learners, people is in there. I have to say the same thing. I always say it gives me great pleasure when I see the light bulb go on above someone's head, where they actually get something that we've been talking about, that they've learned about. But how does this apply to this paper? What do we actually know about joy and pleasure in healthcare and health education? Well, our authors here use words like disorganized and conflicting definitions when they talk about the literature. And so they look for a model to help us understand joy, and that could easily be applied in this setting. So Lara, you can cheer now, because here comes the conceptual framework, which is something I know that you really want every paper to have. So enter the PERMA model, which for some reason I heard about 3 times, not only in this paper, but 3 times within the course of a week for some reason. It's out there. The PERMA model tries to explain the nature and factors that influence human flourishing with a clear and structured components. They talk about 5 building blocks, which include positive emotion, engagements, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. And they also talk about the techniques that can be used to grow in each of these areas. The authors mentioned that this model has not really been used in medicine or with clinicians or educators, although it has been used in many other workplaces. So they had a nice little diagram of the model, and the authors say, and I must say I agree with this, that well-trained, happy, and fulfilled doctors and teachers have a positive impact on their learners, and there's likely a downstream effect of this. So these authors chose to look at the sources of professional joy in highly rated clinician educators. The purpose was to apply the PERMA model to understand the sources of joy at work for a group of internal medicine faculty educators. So what do we think? Lara, Jason, John, is this a good thing to look at?
Oh, for sure. I think if we spend time looking at things like making mistakes and experiences of shame and identity rifts and things like that, we also have to try to look at the other side. So appreciative inquiry. I'm all behind it.
I love the topic. I love the transition from worrying about burnout and badness in our world and talking about, moving along to positive things where we can intervene and make our work better.
I will just add to our conversation by saying I'm always cautious about the line of logic that says, okay, lots of burnout happening. Let's find an intervention that works for the individual rather than an intervention that addresses the system. As if somehow this terrible work environment is now another thing that I have to soldier and fix. So I want to be a bit cautious. The authors, I'll say, don't do that at the end, but there's a bit of a line of argument that gets there. The second part is, I was waiting for them to figure out how they're going to define joy. It's implied there, but you at the start, Linda, used joy and happiness interchangeably, and I think those are very different phenomenon.
That's a good point.
And I'm going to allude to their interview. I have some problems with how they actually structured their interview because I'm not sure if the phenomenon is well appreciated. We use the word joy all the time. It's only 3 letters. How hard could it be? I think it's a much more nuanced phenomenon than we give it credit for.
So I got to say, I got into this and started to read about Nicomachean ethics, Aristotle, and the word eudaimonia came up, which was a new word to me, sort of. And it's sort of joy, happiness, welfare, flourishing. You know, that this goes back several thousand years, more than that, to the Greek philosophers. And you're right, we don't have a good definition, and that's part of the reason I think they did this. I'm going to move on to methods. This was an exploratory qualitative interview study. The participants were, and I think this is important, they were highly rated by students, outpatient clinician teachers and educators in internal medicine at a large American research-based university. So a very focused group to start off with. There were 8 interview questions really to identify sources of joy in personal and professional lives, focusing eventually on clinical teaching. The data was appropriately transcribed. There was a 2-level of coding by 2 investigators, first to just get some general ideas, primary codes, and then to get some themes, which the authors then compared or sort of inserted or aligned, I'm not sure what the right word is, into the PERMA model. And I will in a second ask, sorry guys, I will ask Lara to comment on the methods section. They had an odd reflexivity statement saying 3 physicians and a PhD researcher with a professional focus on education comprised the team. As such, they were aware of personal biases in regard to the value of education and our own joy in teaching, which may influence interpretation of data. Okay, maybe that's a good thing to say. Additionally, the interviewers provided a positive attitude and affirmative statements which may have influenced the integrity of the data. So I'm not really quite sure how to interpret that as a reflexivity statement.
I thought that was cool that they mentioned that they arrived bubbly, and that could, if you buy the fact that that's contagious, that might have skewed their results.
Yeah, it might have skewed even the interviews. That's what I'm thinking. So comments on the methods, Lara, John, Jason?
How about for giggles? Let's go John, Lara, Jason, because John earlier said that he had comments to make. And so I'm anxious to comment on his comments as well.
Go.
I went to the supplementary material, which I don't often do, just to see what did the interview look like. They don't articulate, at least in the précis to their questions, what joy is, and that's fine. They might want to bring that out. So then they ask a couple questions about demographics, and their thing is, first question is, what brings you most joy in your life? I wonder if people think about that in different ways. Then they say, what brings you most joy at work? What are your professional passions? I'm not sure what passion means, because there's another word that's might be correlated, might be Venn diagrammed over. We are interested in your experience in teaching in the clinic. How do you approach having a learner with you? Seems like a generic question for how do you teach in clinic? Is there anything you wish to change about having learners in the clinic? Again, don't get that. And do your interactions with learners contribute to satisfaction or dissatisfaction with your job? That's a yes or no question, which is a weird kind of question to ask for an interview. So I think they probably chose people, or perhaps where it's semi-structured with their subsequent probes, they might have redirected people to get into where it needs to be. But it's just the list of questions that I might have had might have started with, we're talking about joy. How do you experience joy? What does joy mean to you? What brings you joy in your work as a clinician? Is there a role, et cetera, et cetera. So this is not the interview guide that I would have thought.
Wow, my jaw's on the floor. I didn't look at this guide. I assumed, and wow, shocking.
So I agree with you, John, which gives me much chagrin. But yes, I too, fist pump for you. I too found the interview protocol a little problematic. But the point that it's problematic. What I really wanted to comment on, though, is that this paper is a really good example of why I ask people for their paradigmatic orientation in the paper. Because I think this paper is coming from a post-positivist orientation. And I say that because they did semantic coding. And semantic coding it's about staying at the surface. It's very descriptive and looking for explicit statements. Very little inference made. So it's a very surface level description. Whereas, just in case you're wondering, if that's semantic at one end, at the other end, we have latent codes. That's a lot of interpretation. Trying to understand underlying ideas and assumptions and those sorts of things. So, and in addition to using semantic coding, they sought to achieve some saturation. They relied on inter-reviewer convergence for creating codes. So in my mind, that means that this is a post-positivist study. But then, and that's fine, right? It's fine to have a post-positive qualitative study. but that's fine. But then it means that the goal is objectivity. Post-positivism rests on the assumption that there's one reality and we're trying to get as close as we can to that right answer, to that clear description, which is fine. But then you get this, I agree with you, Linda, very unusually constructed reflexivity statement. And reflexivity is a process that researchers use to be self-conscious and to critique, to self-appraise and evaluate how their subjectivity and context influence the research process. It's all about being aware as possible of how your subjectivity shapes the study. And remember, objectivity is about trying to negate all of that. So this is one of those examples where I really need them to tell me how they're trying to come at the data, because I'm not sure what the standards of rigor are that I should be imposing on my reading. What should I be looking for? What are my expectations? I'm going to make one more small point. When they created their themes, I would like to suggest that just something to keep in mind. A code has one meaning unit. A code is one idea. And I think they created 50 codes, not 50 themes, because themes bring together different ideas, bring together different codes, many meaning units to have a broader explanatory power. So when I look at the list of codes that they listed in the paper, they call them themes, but I'd suggest that those are codes. They develop themes once they use the theory.
I was wondering how they got there. They must have emerged. I'm going to pile on. I had the same sort of head scratcher thought about the methodology. I love this topic, and I was so excited to read what they did. I was a little right away. I was a little bit sort of wondering why they chose top-rated teachers as their subjects, and they didn't really justify that to me. At least when I read through it, you could argue that it doesn't have to be top-rated to get at joy. I mean, people who aren't top-rated teachers still have joy, maybe. So I was a bit confused about their logic chain, and then I was confused about their epistemology and where they were coming from. There was kind of a mix of different kinds of words and approaches. So at the end of it, it was all a head scratch. And now I wonder about whether or not these findings and how they could be interpreted. Even though I really like the topic and a lot of the themes foreshadow are resonating with me.
Thanks to all. And I must say, I agree with all of that. Jason, I think they somewhere in here talked about starting with highly rated teachers because they felt that clinical teachers had more joy. And in fact, one of our master's students did a study in Thailand looking at clinical teachers who seemed to have less burnout and be happier and more satisfied with life. So that's maybe a fairly broad thing. It's not good clinician teachers, but anyway. So what did they find? Very briefly, 15 of 24 people invited participated. They were all internal medicine specialists. Many we would define as clinician teachers. Some were clinician educators. 50 what they call themes, what we might call codes, were identified. When you start to look at what they were, because they have a figure 2, they really look like they're not themes per se. 45 of them, actually, these sources of joy aligned with the PERMA model. And there were a couple of others that didn't. One was about patients, and a couple of others were about the system. Of interest within the PERMA model, teaching and working alongside learners was something that came up in many of the parts of the PERMA model. They had a couple of interesting phrases: instantaneous happiness and contagious excitement, which is, I think, sometimes what we feel when we're joyful. Again, relationships, engagement, the idea that working alongside learners often led to us learning, both in terms of knowledge or decision-making or clinical skills. The idea of relationships with colleagues and learners. The idea that we're successful. Meaning means success. It can be learners learning something or patients getting better. Training the next generation of clinicians. And accomplishment, improving the health of patients, better research. So most themes, in fact, or codes, if we want to call it that, were in the PERMA model domains of relationships and meaning. Although it's interesting, people weren't invited to really discuss the negative sides of joy. Many of the participants did have concerns that clinician teachers were undervalued, they were poorly compensated. And there are a number of suggestions that came out to improve joy. And by the way, John, they were at a systems level rather than an individual level. Incentives, protected time, modifying schedules, administrative tasks. And there was one quotation in here I really liked. Teaching is protective against burnout. I really like that quote. The authors conclude that using the PERMA model to explore sources of professional joy for highly rated medical educators is worked, and that interactions with learners are a prominent source of professional joy. The authors also suggest that this research aims to foster joy in medical educators has the potential to combat burnout and create a brighter future for the next generations of physicians. Whoa, that's going quite far with that. So any last comments? I guess I would say as a paperclip, what about those teachers who we've mentioned it, who weren't highly rated? Are less highly rated teachers less happy? Are they less happy because they're less highly rated? Is it a chicken and egg thing? I don't know. So final comments before we go to our highly valid rating scales?
The only comment I would make, Linda, is that I think it's actually a really important topic. I think it's really important for us to be considering what brings us joy at the office. And as medical educators, we're in a really weird office space. So I think it's an incredibly valid question and area of inquiry. I would love to encourage more people and these authors to continue their investigations. Let's keep doing it.
I like this manuscript and the way that it uses a model to kind of align some of the codes that they find. But I'd argue that there's a danger here. So that quote that teaching is protective against burnout, I can find you a whole bunch of people that will disagree with that statement. Now, it may not be the actual interaction with learners, but it's the paperwork or the digital work that comes with being a supervisor and an educator in the current teaching environments that we have right now. And here's the danger, the illogic. They select medical educators. And they say, you know what, we think there's some weak signal that says medical educators may be vaccinated against burnout a little bit more, maybe happier people. I didn't look up those references, but I got to imagine those are spurious because I can be cranky at the best of times. And so then they say, you know what, one of the predictors of having joy in your practice is being a teacher. And then there's in the discussion, hence, you should go out and teach. And I think that's an illogic because they start from a subset of people that when they're doing what they have aligned with and where they find meaning, then they get joy. It's not the students that are the solutions for combating burnout and finding joy again. Although for me, it definitely is. I really get a lot of whatnot. It's very much like that Viktor Frankl, A Man's Search for Meaning idea, that if you have a meaning in what you do, then you will find purpose and then you will have joy, not necessarily happiness. And so I think the bigger meta for the listener is not to go find a student, although if you're listening to an education podcast, maybe it is, but it's to go find something that's meaningful in your work.
So let's do our rating scale first on methods. So I'll go John, Jason, Lara.
I struggle because I just worry that they did lots of things to try to produce rigor. They were a little bit upside down a couple times. None of them are massive fatal flaws, but the interview guide, it got you some outputs, but not in the way that I might have structured it. So I can give it a 2.
You rated my paper much worse. This is
because it was way worse.
It's clearly a problematic methodology, so I'm going to give it a 2 as well.
I'll give it a 2.
And so will I. Boy, I think we haven't agreed for quite a while on that.
Ages, years.
What about impact, education importance? We'll reverse the order again and see who remembers who went last.
I know I went last, so it's okay. This is a tricky one for me because I'm going to give it a 3 because I think the topic is important. I'm not sure this is the manuscript that I would use to share to necessarily indicate the best direction for next studies and all those sorts of things. But I think it has value. I like the theory. I think there's pieces here that are incredibly useful. So yeah, I just talked myself into a 3.5.
So scientific and reproducible.
Yeah.
I'm going to give this a 3. They get a point from me for being first past the post, so being one of the early studies on joy in medicine. The model is useful. I would use the model. I would point to this paper to say, hey, here's a model that we can all make a lingua franca out of. Otherwise, not so much. So 3.
It'll be interesting to note that Curious, which is an open online journal that has a different kind of publishing format, no longer accepts manuscripts on resident burnout, presumably because they're getting overwhelmed with it.
Oh.
But here's an interesting take, which is how to find joy in the context of burnout. I think they don't put that line of argument together as completely as I want, but it does have some value and it does advance things forward. And so here's maybe a counterpoint to a journal editorial decision. So on the basis of that, I don't see a ton of stuff here. The PERMA model was interesting to me, although I think it's really all about relationships and meaning that will bring you joy. And so I'm going to give this manuscript a 3.
Oh, you guys are tough. I'm going to give it a 4. Not because of the results in the manuscript, but just because I think it is, number 1, an important topic. Number 2, because it is so refreshing to not hear about burnout and depression and all of those things. So for me, it's a 4. So that's it. I hope you have got some joy and pleasure out of reading the article. Lara has a last word.
Before we sign off, Linda, let's just put out one more request to all of our keen listeners. We are really looking forward to hopefully meeting many of you in Warwick this summer when we are there for the ASME conference. And that's running July 10 through 12. All 4 of us will be there. So please come, join us at the conference. Know that no matter where I am standing, I'm lost. And I would greatly appreciate your assistance.
We vouch for that.
Right. I know. And all of us would really love a chance just to say hi and get to know you. So please come join us in Warwick this summer at ASME.
Well, you said what I was going to say. So now I don't have a sign off. Anyway.
Do you just go first then?
No, that's fine. So Lara has told you where we're going to be, and we will be there. And so let's sign off now. Remember, if you want to reach us before the conference, you can reach us at thepaperspodcast@gmail.com, and you can check us out at paperspodcast.com.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening.
Take care, everybody.
All right.
Linda, when you start,
20 years.
You don't come back in again. You're
20
2
years.
practices too.
All right. That was
all
fun,
good.
guys. I got to go.
Yeah.
Talk to you later. Bye, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Papers Podcast. We hope we made you just slightly smarter. The podcast is a production of the Unit for Teaching and Learning at the Karolinska Institutet. The executive producer today was my friend Teresa Sörö. The technical producer today was Samuel Lundberg. You can learn more about the Papers Podcast and contact us at www.thepaperspodcast.com. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you for all you do. Take care.